Blog Talk Radio.
The cycle of tyranny, from liberty to complacency, from complacency to dependency, from dependency to tyranny, from tyranny to revolution, from revolution back to liberty.
Welcome, folks, to another episode of Lori's Talk News Radio. It's August 21st, 2012. Wasn't sure exactly what I was going to get into this week. Originally, I was thinking about just kind of doing a recap on some of the previous shows and just kind of hit some of the highlights of that. Well, I was on another couple of shows that I follow over the weekend, and people were talking, and I realized that there's different forms of government, different law forms, and that type of thing. And as I was listening to some of these people talk, I realized that they didn't really seem to understand that. We hear talk about this left and right and all this, and it seems most people just equate that with being, quote-unquote, a conservative or a liberal or a Democrat or Republic. And so I remembered a tape. It's actually the video, but of course I can only do the audio on it here. About a 10-minute clip that I was going to play that does a pretty good job of explaining really what the difference is between left and right. There's some graphics, obviously, you all won't be able to see. The name of it is Understanding the Different Forms of Government. So if you guys want to look that up on YouTube, it's a pretty informative little clip, but I think you can get enough out of the audio to get the gist there. And then after that, I thought I'd maybe just, if there's time enough left over, is kind of just go over and mention some of the different law forms that there are, and also to discuss the difference between rights and privileges. That's another area that a lot of people seem to blur the lines on, and I think sometimes we're not sure of the difference. So anyway, let me play this clip, and we'll come back and see if there's any questions or anything, and hopefully this will be helpful. Here we go.
When Benjamin Franklin exited the Constitutional Convention, he was asked by a woman, "Sir, what have you given us?" His immediate response was, "A republic, ma'am, if you can keep it." Yet most Americans today have been persuaded that our nation's governmental system is a democracy and not a republic. The difference between these two is essential in understanding Americanism and the American system. Before we discuss political systems, however, it's helpful to address the confusion that has been spread about the political spectrum. Many have been led to believe that the political spectrum places groups such as communists on the far left, fascists or dictators on the far right, and political moderates or centrists in the middle. However, a more accurate political spectrum will show government having zero power on the far right to having 100% power on the far left. At the extreme right, there is no government. The extreme left features total government under such labels as communism, socialism, Nazism, fascism, princes, potentates, dictators, kings, any form of total government. Those who claim that Nazis and fascists are right-wing never define their terms. This amounts to spreading confusion. Toward the middle of the political spectrum can be found the type of government limited to its proper role of protecting the rights of the people. That's where the Constitution of the United States is. Those who advocate such a form of government are really constitutional moderates. So let's analyze the basic forms of government. They are monarchy or dictatorship ruled by one, oligarchy ruled by a few, democracy ruled by a majority, republic ruled by law, and anarchy, which is ruled by no one. In discussing these five, we'll see that they can be narrowed down to even fewer. Looking first at monarchy or dictatorship, this form of government doesn't really exist in the practical sense. It's always a group that puts one of its members up front. A king has his council of nobles or earls, and every dictator has his bureaucrats or commissars, the men behind the scenes. This isn't ruled by one, even though one person may be the visible leader. It's ruled by a group. So let's eliminate monarchy, dictatorship, because it never truly exists. Oligarchy, which is ruled by a group, is the most common form of government in all history, and it is the most common form of government today. Most of the nations of the world are ruled by a powerful few, and therefore oligarchy remains. At the other end, we find anarchy, which means without government. Some people have looked over history and found that many of its worst crimes were committed by governments, so they decided that having no government might be a good idea. But this is a mistake, because as the ancient Greeks stated, without law there can be no freedom. Our founding fathers agreed and held that some amount of government is a necessary force in any civilized, orderly society. In a state of anarchy, however, everyone has to guard life, liberty, and property, and the lives of family members. Everyone must be armed, and movement is severely restricted because one's property has to be protected at all times. Civilized people have always hired someone to do the guarding, a sheriff, a police force, or some branch of government. Once law enforcement was in place, the people were freer. They could leave their property, work in the fields, and so on. In short, the proper amount of government makes everyone freer. There are some who advocate anarchy, however, not because they want no government, but because they don't like what they have. They use anarchy as a tool for revolutionary change. The condition of anarchy is very much like a vacuum where something rushes in to fill it. These calculating anarchists work to break down the existing government with rioting, killing, looting, and terrorism. Tragically, the people living in such chaos often go to those best able to put an end to it and beg them to take over and restore order. And who is best able to put an end to the chaos? The very people who started it. The anarchists who created the problem then create a government run by them, an oligarchy, where they have total power. This is exactly what happened in Russia that led to Lenin taking total power, and in Germany where Hitler's brown shirts created the chaos that brought him to power. But anarchy isn't a stable form of government. It's a quick transition from something that exists to something desired by the power-hungry. It's a temporary condition, and because it isn't permanent, we eliminate it as well. The word democracy comes from two Greek words, demos, meaning people, and kratein, meaning to rule. Democracy, therefore, means the rule of the people, majority rule. This, of course, sounds good, but suppose the majority decides to take away one's home, or business, or children. Obviously, there has to be a limit. The flaw in democracy is that the majority isn't restrained. If more than half the people can be persuaded to want something in a democracy, they rule. What about republic? Well, that comes from the Latin, res meaning thing, and publica meaning public. It means the public thing, the law. A true republic is one where the government is limited by law, leaving the people alone. America's founders had a clean slate to write on. They could have set up an oligarchy. In fact, there were some who wanted George Washington to be their king. But the founding fathers knew history, and they chose to give us the rule of law in a republic, not the rule of a majority in a democracy. Why? Let's demonstrate the difference in the setting of the Old West. Consider a lynch mob in a democracy. 35 horseback riders chase one lone gunman. They catch him, and they vote 35 to 1 to hang him. Democracy has triumphed, and there's one less gunman to contend with. Now consider the same scenario in a republic. The 35 horseback riders catch the gunman and vote 35 to 1 to hang him, but the sheriff arrives, and he says, "You can't kill him. He's got his right to a fair trial." So they take the gunman back to town. A jury of his peers is selected, and they hear the evidence and the defense, and they decide if he shall hang. Does the jury even decide by majority rule? No, it has to be unanimous, or he goes free. The rights of the government aren't subject to majority rule, but to the law. This is the essence of a republic. Many Americans would be surprised to learn that the word democracy does not appear in the Declaration of Independence or the U.S. Constitution, nor does it appear in any of the constitutions of the 50 states. The founders did everything they could to keep us from having a democracy. James Madison, rightly known as the father of the Constitution, wrote in essay number 10 of the Federalist Papers, Democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, have ever been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. Alexander Hamilton agreed, and he stated, "We are a republican government. Real liberty is never found in despotism or in the extremes of democracy." Samuel Adams, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, stated, "Democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself." The founders had good reason to look upon democracy with contempt, because they knew that the democracies in the early Greek city-states produced some of the wildest excesses of government imaginable. In every case, they ended up with mob rule, then anarchy, and finally tyranny under an oligarchy. During that period in Greece, there was a man named Solon, who urged creation of a fixed body of law not subject to majority whims. But where the Greeks never adopted Solon's wise counsel, the Romans did. Based on what they knew of Solon's laws, they created the 12 tables of the Roman law, and in effect built a republic that limited government power and left the people alone. Since government was limited, the people were free to produce, with the understanding that they could keep the fruits of their labor. In time, Rome became wealthy and the envy of the world. In the midst of plenty, however, the Roman people forgot what freedom entailed. They forgot that the essence of freedom is the proper limitation of government. When government power grows, people freedom recedes. Once the Romans dropped their guard, power-seeking politicians began to exceed the powers granted them in the Roman Constitution. Some learned that they could elect politicians who would use government power to take property from some and give it to others. Agriculture subsidies were introduced, followed by housing and welfare programs. Inevitably, taxes rose and controls over the private sector were imposed. Soon, a number of Rome's producers could no longer make ends meet, and they went on the dole. Productivity declined, shortages developed, and mobs began roaming the streets, demanding bread and circuses from the government. Many were induced to trade freedom for security. Eventually, the whole system came crashing down. They went from a republic to a democracy and ended up with an oligarchy under a progression of the Caesars. Thus, democracy itself is not a stable form of government. Instead, it is the gradual transition from limited government to the unlimited rule of an oligarchy. Knowing this, we as Americans are ultimately left with only two choices. We can keep our republic, as Franklin put it, or we will inevitably end up with an oligarchy, a tyranny of the elite.
Okay, so I'm hoping that that kind of helped to clear up some of this, what we talk about with left-right. So followed all that. Basically, when we talk about this left-right conservative-liberal thing, we're off on the wrong trail from the get-go, because we're not talking about anarchy on one end and total despotism of some form of dictator on the other end. So that's why I wanted to bring that up. I'm going to go ahead and unmute both the callers here. I know who one of them is, and I believe the other one's Jackie. Is that you, Jackie?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that was a clip that I wanted to bring up. I had mentioned earlier some of the conversations I've been in on listening to some of these talk shows and other things, was that, in fact, the one we were on this weekend, is I find that a lot of people don't seem to understand different law forms nor forms of government. And I remembered this little clip that I had. Had you heard that one before?
It sounds really familiar.
Okay. Well, it's I think it does pretty good to explain that, instead of getting this old left-right, conservative liberal business, is to understand that. The other thing that they mentioned Solon in here, and I wanted to throw this in because I'm surprised they didn't mention this, but you can catch that in one of Kennedy's speeches. It's kind of a little side note. Solon also made it illegal to what he called shrink from adversity. you didn't just see something wrong going on and shrink from it and not say any or do anything about it because that was illegal. And that's one of the things that has been missing. This is really how we lost our republic, I believe, is that people have shrunk from adversity. Instead of saying, no, this is wrong, this is not going to stand. And yet we've slowly over time acquiesced like the old frog in the boiling frog in the pot with the heat turned up low. So anyway, so that I think kind of covers some of the different forms of government there. The other thing I noticed too is when people start talking about law, they kind of bounce back and forth and they just use this generic term law. Well, there's a lot of different types of law, and I'm not going to get into it this show because it's about half over a little better. So I'll just throw out some of the names. I mean, you have canon law, you have common law, you have maritime admiralty law, you have equity law. I mean, there's all kinds of different laws, and you need to know what law form you're dealing with, because if you don't, you're coming at it from one angle that's not really relevant in the other. And a lot of these where we in this country find ourselves dealing with is a commerce type of law. Admiralty, which lies land of the water, and then common law is law of the land. And that's why the Constitution says it's supreme law of the land. So those are some of the law forms there and the government forms there that I just wanted to see about getting hopefully cleared up. I don't know if that has, helped clear that up, or if there's any questions from anybody. Was that pretty straightforward, or are there any questions or comments?
I found that to be extremely helpful, and I would like to get the information on it so that I can listen to it again at my leisure.
Okay, since I happen to know who you are and what your address is, your email address, I could probably send it, but it goes by a couple names. The one I got, Understanding the Different Forms of Government, and it's readily available on YouTube, but I'll send you the link.
Okay.
A little bit later. But yeah, does that make sense though, Teresa? As far as this whole left-right, so they got us doing this Democrat-Republican thing and calling it left-right when you're off the mark just right off the bat.
I thought it was very helpful. It was very clear, and I had forgotten a lot of that from when I was in college. So the reminder and the way it was presented, I thought was awesome.
Okay, well, I'll send you that link, and it has some pretty neat graphics if you have the video that you can watch too. And Jackie, not to get into a whole nother show with other people, but it was those shows we were on and the little, what shall I say, the tiff, the scuffle, whatever we want to call it, the spat, that who will remain nameless, was going on, was not understanding what you were trying to tell him. The sheer act of going to the state, be it the state of or be it the federal government, and requesting a permit or a license is requesting permission, which gets into the whole thing, too, that I wanted to bring up briefly, is the difference between rights and privileges. Now, another one I didn't download, I was going to find it. There's a man named Michael Badnarik. He's actually run for president. A lot of people don't even know who he is, never even heard of him. That's how effective the media is. But he does constitutional classes, and he does a real good job of explaining the difference between a right and a privilege. And I'll probably butcher it, but I'm going to try to paraphrase. A right is something that is inherent. It is something you do not have to ask anybody permission for. It is something you can simply do. There's no higher authority to ask permission. A privilege, on the other hand, is something you do not have the inherent right. You must get somebody's permission for. For example, if I own, and I'm using that loosely and advisedly, but if I own a piece of property, I have the right to walk up and down every square inch of that property. I don't have to ask you or the state or the national government anything. I have a right because I own it. It's mine. Now, if it turns out that I have to walk across somebody's property to get to my mailbox, I need to ask their permission for that. And they may grant it, they may not. But even if they say, oh yeah, sure, just help yourself. Whenever you need to check mail, go do that. And that's fine, but it is still a privilege. They can revoke that at any time. A right cannot be suspended or revoked. It can be forcibly suppressed, but it cannot be put a lien against. That's what unalienable or inalienable. But a privilege can be. That's why people get their driver's licenses revoked or suspended, because you went to the state, you asked them permission. It's out of ignorance, but that's a whole nother story. It's the same thing with marriage. You go get a license. Permits and licenses fall under a general category of what they call licensure, and it is asking permission. So when the guy that will remain nameless was talking about it in this case, not to get in this whole bailiwick, about homosexual marriage. Absolutely right. You have a right to get married. But that wasn't the case. The case is they wanted to go to the state, ask permission, because they want to be, quote unquote, officially recognized and be able to get tax exemptions and all that for being married. Well, they just asked the state permission. Hey, can we get married? And as you pointed out, they said no. And now they're all huffy-puffy, bowed up. Well, don't get a license. I don't care if you're heterosexual or homosexual. Get married, put down in your Bible.
No, not here.
What's
Remember
that?
They said no, not here.
Right. Well, that's the only place they have the jurisdiction is in that state, and that's what I think you were trying to explain to them. If Georgia tells you no, then move to Alabama. But if you're going to ask that permission, if you want to get married, I wouldn't suggest if you're homosexual, but you put it in the Bible like they used to before they started this licensure to get married. That's not something we need to get permission from the state for, any more than we do for a firearm. Sorry to bring that up, but, you know, I mean, it's just that we go ask for permission. Do I have to have permission from anybody to protect myself? No, I do not. It's an inherent right that I have. I don't have to ask anybody's permission. If you come thump me upside the head with a stick, do I have to say, oh, can I pick up a rock and throw it back? I don't think so. You pick it up and you throw it back. But they try to turn this and blur all these lines with rights and privileges. And so that's kind of where we're at with that. So did that do pretty good, Jackie, at explaining what you were, and I was trying to get that out, but it was almost impossible to get a word in edgewise. Is that pretty much what you were trying to explain to, what's his name?
Yes, that was a great presentation, Larry.
Well, I thought so, and I was getting frustrated because he was just getting rude, and I'm sitting here going, you know, and that's why I come up. I said, look, she is not talking. You're talking from a moral perspective, and Jackie's talking from a legal perspective. She's not saying that they can't get married if she agrees or different. The point is you're asking permission. You're turning a right into a privilege by your own doing. You ask permission. You know, if you ask me, can I sell my house? Well, yeah, but only if I get half the proceeds. Well, I don't have any right to that, but if you come ask me permission, now I've got permission. Same thing when you go register your car. Who paid for that car? You did, but you go fill out an application, which means you're begging, to register, which means to abandon your vehicle. And they give you this certificate of title, you know, when it's paid off. Well, a certificate's not the title, it's just that. It's a certificate of title. And so we turn a lot of these rights into privileges just through our own sheer ignorance. And I'm not calling anybody names. I did the same thing. You just don't know. You're brought up, you know, you got to get a driver's license. Oh, you got to get a Social Security card. Oh, you got to get this and that, because it's been going on for so long. People don't realize, right? I mean, I don't know if you guys heard, but there's been several cases of people having, it seems like it's mostly women, having people breaking into their house, and they're calling 911 asking permission to shoot them. And one of them, I don't remember, one of them was in New York or something, I think. Anyway, they said, no, don't shoot him. Well, she ended up having to shoot him anyway. And the other one, apparently the 911 operator said, yeah, go ahead and shoot him. But we don't have to ask that permission. We have an inherent God-given right to protect our life and our property. But as soon as we ask permission, then there you go. So I don't know if there's any comments or anything on that. Anything you guys want to add or not?
I think that maybe people need to start looking into the different types of law before they could really grasp the meaning of asking permission for something and giving up your right. Well, I said that backwards. Giving up your right to things that you should have by asking permission and just using your right to do it. And I think that when people need to realize that when you ask for permission, you're asking a certain person or a certain entity.
Right, and that's what I may be getting into next week. I'm not going to drill down to the nth degree because, you know, it gets pretty cumbersome pretty quick. But that's why I just wanted to throw out a couple of different law forms as they're known, just so that at least people are aware that, yeah, there's different forms. You know, one of the things that's interesting about this Michael Badnarik on his constitutional class, one of his pet peeves is when people say, I have constitutional rights. No such thing. We have God-given rights, some of which are enumerated in the Constitution, but the Constitution, it is effectively, it's a piece of paper. It doesn't give us anything. We the people, way back when men were men and sheep were afraid, but we got together and we said, hey, we have these God-given rights, and here's some of them. This isn't all of them, but this is some of them. So, and then when you get into, as previous conversations, you know, with losing our republic and that type of thing, and the breakdown of the Articles of Confederation, and it's really the Constitution is between the states, and you go into a court and you say, I have my constitutional rights, and say, well, you're not party to the Constitution. That's true on two counts. One, you're not a state, you didn't, and two, you never signed on to it. And that's how they're getting some of us is we never became parties to these instruments in that we never acknowledged them. I'm hoping, well, I was hoping I had my note here, if I can find it. You have to do an acknowledgement and an acceptance for these to actually be valid. That's in our place even with titles of cars, vehicles, and homes. Even once they're paid off, you have to actually do an acknowledgement and an acceptance of that. Because otherwise it's just this thing sitting there in limbo. Anyhow, so that's, we're coming up to about the end of the show. I mean, I could go a little bit longer if one of y'all have questions, but that's mainly what I wanted to. Government forms, law forms, and rights and privileges. And then I'll try to pick up on this maybe next week. So either one of you guys got any closing comments or anything?
No, not right now, but I'm looking forward to the next show.
Oh, well, I guess that's a good thing.
That was a good presentation. That was well how you put it. I'm happy you cleared that up, and I hope that many people are listening or go in the archive and check out the show so you can be more informed when building an argument.
Yeah. Well, I hope it does help, guys. That's why I'm doing this. It's not, you know, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an attorney. Have no desire to be one. It's just some research that I've come across, and I'm trying to get it out there for people. And, yeah, Teresa, I will send you that link to that video. And if you watch it at, you know, at your leisure and see the graphics to go with it, I think it'll help quite a bit. I don't think I have an email address or anything for you, Jackie, if you're interested in that too, or if you've heard it, but you can look it up online if you like. So
I've heard it. I've actually heard it a couple of times, and I think Robert Maynard, he explains it really well as well.
Yeah, Menard. He's one of the first ones I ran into, and got me started. But anyway, well, thanks for joining, and I'll try to put something along those lines with different law forms and that type of thing next week. And I'll get that out to you, Teresa, that link. So thanks for joining this week, and we'll see you next week, Lord willing.
All right. You have a good night.
You too. Bye-bye.